Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here to talk to you about the best performances of Sibelius's forbidding Fourth Symphony. Yes, this is the darkest and most tragic and most creepy, spooky, desolate pieces of symphonic writing in the entire, first half of the 20th century, probably. It's an extraordinary piece, but also very, very beautiful. Lots and lots and lots of fun, if you know and love Sibelius, of course. If you don't, you may think it's about the dullest and most miserable thing you've ever heard in your life. But I'm here to show you that that is not true and that you should love it. One of the conductors who loved it was Thomas Beecham. And Thomas Beecham was just wonderful. Thomas Beecham was, a character, as we all know. And one of the things he was told was that Sibelius's Fourth was too tough a nut for the audiences in the English provinces on his upcoming tour to tolerate. And so what did he do? He put it on every program and played it constantly. It was really quite wonderful. And, it's such an unusual symphony, such a strange symphony, really, that it almost never gets performed badly. The only issue here is which performances are really the most outstanding and distinctive. And I've chosen 7 of them. This does not mean that there are not others that are wonderful. There really are. And I mean, Beecham did a live one. It was on BBC Classics, I think. That was fabulous. There are many great Sibelius Fourths out there. But I'm talking about the 7 that I think really sort of display all the things there are to know about this particular work and that are really just amazing. But if you have a good Sibelius cycle that you like, chances are the Fourth will be very good. I don't think there are any cycles where the Fourth is the weak link in the cycle. The weak links are usually the first and the second, maybe the fifth. But the Fourth, it's so individual to what it is that it almost always goes well. I wouldn't say it's indestructible. That's not quite true. It's been destructed. It can be done, but it's very rare that it happens, which is a good thing. But I would like to tell you a little bit about the symphony itself. One of the reasons it's considered to be so dark and gloomy is because its thematic and harmonic material is based entirely on the tritone. A famous Norwegian critic called it a bark-brought symphony, meaning, in a time of famine, bread was made of tree bark because there was no flour around, and you had to survive on it. I don't think this symphony is that grim. I really don't. I don't think it's lacking in emotional intensity, for example. It's an incredibly intense piece of music, extraordinarily atmospheric. I wouldn't call it a bark-brought symphony. I would call it a pumpernickel symphony. I mean, if it had a nickname, call it the pumpernickel. I think that one's a little better because yes, it's dark, but we like it. We like it, and that's the point. The point is it's dark but beautiful, dark but moving, dark but really gripping. That's the whole point of this thing. But as I said, the entire harmonic and melodic substance is based on the interval of a tritone. Now, what is a tritone? Well, it just so happens I have my sample device here, my little keyboard thingy. And I'm going to tell you what a tritone is. Oops, pardon me. Yeah, I know. I've got to let go. Hold it. There we go. This is what happens when you're sitting down in front of these things. Okay, so a tritone is very simple. It's 3 whole steps. In the key of C major, that would be F and B. Oh, my goodness. Listen to that. See, I'm using an organ tone because A, it's creepier, and B, I can sustain it more easily. So that's a tritone. It's this interval. And it's contained in every scale normally. Like here's a C major scale. And if you just take the F and the B, there's a tritone. In the Middle Ages, it was called the devil in music, Diabolus in musica. And the note B, this one, was banned by theoreticians because it was considered to be the devil in music. They couldn't understand acoustically why it was that all of the other intervals that way, like if you go up in perfect fourths, they sound fine. Then you get to this one. Heck! You see what happens? And so they got rid of the note B, and they substituted it with B flat. So you get that, and that made it nice again. That's why if you are a student of musical notation, in German, the note B, like we have A, B, C, D, E, F, G, right, in our alphabet, the alphabetical letters for the notes of the scale, or C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C is the way it goes in a C major scale. The note B in German is really B flat, and B natural, this nasty tritone one, that one is the note H, because it had been banned, eliminated from the normal scale because of its habit of forming tritones. Well, Sibelius bases this entire symphony on that basic, fundamental harmonic principle. And that's one of the things that makes the piece so gripping and moving and primal sounding. It has an elemental quality that's based on the simple natural acoustic fact that this is what happens when you put a major scale together. You will have a tritone. And if you actually base your themes and the underlying harmonies on it, oh my, you're going to have some very disturbing music. Now, here is the opening of the symphony. Let me see if I can do this. It's in A minor. So our tritone in this case is not going to be F and B natural. It's going to be C and F sharp. It's going to be this one. Hear that? So you have cellos, basses, and bassoons. That's all that are playing. And here is the opening gesture. You ready? It's very simple. And under this thing, under that simple tritone major third, right? Major third, tritone. Oh, sorry. There you go. Tritone major third. The cello sings out the opening theme, but the tension that this simple little gesture creates is just extraordinary. It's so disturbing. And this is a slow movement. The opening movement of the symphony is a slow movement, almost an adagio. And a very spooky slow movement it is. And that's really all you need to know. Let me move this thing before I cut off my circulation. All you need to know about the thematic substance of the symphony, because all of the major themes and a lot of the harmonic underpinning is based on this concept of tritonal harmony. So, I want to play you, give me a second here, I'm going to play you the opening of the symphony with the initial theme on the solo cello, just so you get a sense of how it lays out in real life on the orchestra. And the other thing that makes Sibelius so extraordinary as a composer is his ability to make very simple sounds sound completely new. Amazingly new. I mean, play the very first chord of the Lemminkainen legends, Lemminkainen and the Maidens of Sorry, and ask yourself, sorry, whatever. Ask yourself, what is doing that? It's just a simple chord on horns. But nobody ever wrote a chord that sounds like that. And that's what happens here too. The opening is simply for cellos, basses, and bassoons. But it is the darkest, gnarliest, spookiest thing you've ever heard in your life. And it does what I just played. That was the opening. And I want you to hear what it sounds like on the orchestra and how much darker and creepier it sounds in Sibelius's unbelievably simple scoring. His orchestration, in a sense, is as primal as the harmonic basis of the music itself. That gives the music such a sense of naturalness, of inevitability, of it can't be any other wayness, if you want to call it that. And I'm starting out with a performance which is my favorite, my recommendation. We're having our however moment right now. However, the best Sibelius fourth is Leif Segerstam with the Helsinki Philharmonic Orchestra on Ondine, coupled with an incredibly fabulous Pohjola's Daughter and Oceanides. It's just an amazing disc, and here is the opening of the Fourth Symphony. So you get the picture, just how dark and creepy it is, but so simple, so elegantly simple, primevally simple. And the entire progress of this symphony, people call it tragic. It's not tragic. It's desolate. There's a difference, because tragedy has to be the result of failure to win victory. An inevitable defeat after heroic efforts to triumph. This symphony never does that. This symphony is consistently defeated. It consists of continual efforts to grope upwards towards the light. And this upward movement, the purity of simple harmony without the tritone versus the gnarly harmony with the tritone, these things are juxtaposed. And just as it seems that the clouds part and the beams of light shine through, darkness closes in. And this happens over and over and over again. I'm going to play you a couple ways in which it happens. You've heard the opening theme of the first movement, and the rest I leave to you. The only other thing I would say is that, Sibelius intended this piece as a protest against modern music. That is, the Rite of Spring, that sort of stuff, Stravinsky, what was happening. And he said there's nothing of the circus about it at all. And of course there isn't. There absolutely is not. But it sounds an awful lot like Bartók's music for strings, percussion, and celesta, which wasn't written until over a decade later. But this piece has some of the same qualities. If you listen to the opening fugue and the spooky slow movement, the third movement of the Bartók, you hear a lot of the same sounds that you hear in this piece. Only Sibelius achieves the same effects with even simpler means as often as not. It's phenomenal, it really is. So, after the first movement, we have a scherzo. Now, as you know, most scherzos, or minuets, or any kind of dance movement, has a simple ABA form. And, you have an opening section, then a contrasting middle section, which is called a trio, and then the opening section returns and rounds the thing off. Sibelius plays with us. He plays with our anticipation. What he does is he gives you the full A section, and then a very disturbed, blustery trio. It's like it's been described as a winter wind blowing through and shivering you, and it really does. It really sounds like that. The music becomes incredibly disturbed, and then just as it seems that the opening is going to return, we expect it. He gives us just the first two notes of it. It stops. It just stops with a little rhythm on the timpani, blum, 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 and it's done. It gives up. It's just an amazing moment. And so what I'm going to play you now is the opening of the A section, the first sort of paragraph of the A section. And then there'll be a little 1 second pause and how it sounds on its return. just as you think it's coming back, and then it's just poof, goes away like a soap bubble. It's really, really amazing. And you know that it's coming back because of one note. The opening oboe solo, which is yeah, da, 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 do. It's all Sibelius has to do, this time in the violins on the return, for you to know that it's coming back. And then it doesn't. Oh my gosh, it's so disturbing. Here is the opening then, and then the very ending of the second movement, just to get that sense of how Sibelius finds ever new ways to represent defeat, some kind of forestalled resolution. Here it is. Well, I think that should be pretty self-explanatory. Now, the slow movement, the actual slow movement, because the first movement is slow also, is the third movement. And this movement is, without a doubt, the most desolate piece of music by any major composer, before the 50s, let's just say. It is a piece of music in search of a tune. And that tune also is tritonal in nature, but it almost makes it. The biggest climax in the symphony, really, the most positive climax in the symphony occurs in this movement, but it too fails. And I'm going to play you that moment, that wonderful moment when it seems that finally it's like a mountain rising up out of the mists, piercing through the clouds. But no, at the last moment, the energy just drains right out of it. It's unbelievable. Here is that stunning moment. Now, up until that point, the music really drifts about. You hear bits of this tune. This tune keeps trying to arrive so that when it finally does, you think, aha, the big romantic climax. No. Doesn't happen that way. Now, the finale has its own fascination. First of all, it is the only finale after the Sibelius of the First Symphony to include extra percussion. And there is a huge controversy over what that extra percussion ought to be, because Sibelius intended a glockenspiel, which can be abbreviated Glocken, period, which also means bells, big tubular bells. And there is an argument for using big tubular bells. Some performances use both together, which I think is unquestionably wrong, but it sounds pretty cool when it happens. Colin Davis does it that way. Leonard Bernstein does it that way. But there is a moment in the middle of this movement which really justifies the use of tubular bells. It's the central climax of that movement, and Sibelius plays the glockenspiel theme. The glockenspiel only plays 4 notes. Da, 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 over and over again. That's all it does. Do, 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 do. And it does this over and over and over again. But here it's augmented. Da, 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 like that. And Sibelius marks it sonore, sonorous. Now, the glockenspiel is many things. Bright, perky, jolly, sonorous? No. No, it's not. And at that one moment, tubular bells really sound pretty damn good. And it's not a bad idea to throw them in. One conductor, that's the word, who does it that way is Eugene Ormandy, who we'll get to in a moment. Not in his mono recording, but in his later RCA remake. And other conductors have also added bells to the glockenspiel at that particular moment, because you just want more of a bell sound for the length of time that those notes are supposed to be sustained. Here is the moment in question on the Ondine recording, which plays it come scritto, as they say in the biz, as Sibelius originally wrote it, with no additional thingies happening. Here it is. Now, this finale works itself up into an absolutely hellacious climax that rips the fabric of the music to shreds. It's really the only movement in quick sonata form. The first movement is in sonata form too, but this is a quick sonata form, so it has much more energy to it, and that energy just explodes in a climax which completely tears the music apart. It's the only way to describe it. It feels like that tritonal harmony is clawing the music until it finally collapses in complete and total despair, and the music ends with a few brusque chords in A minor, just a completely dismissive, empty gesture. It's even marked mezzo forte. It's just mezzo. It's not happy. It's not sad. It's just completely indifferent. It's desolate, empty, nothing. Forget about it. And that's the ending. My God, it's wonderful. And once you get to know the symphony, I know all these descriptions sounds horrifying. I know it does. But the music itself is so beautiful and so incredibly well written and so typically Sibelian, full of those elements that only Sibelius has. The use of string tremolos, the swelling brass chords, the pedal points, that is sustained notes underneath where the harmony changes on top that creates incredible tension. That moment I played you with the glockenspiel just now, that's one of those moments with the pedal point where you hear the brass swelling out underneath a rocking ostinato in the strings, and then finally it just snaps like a rubber band. Yeah, da-dum, bum, 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 bum. It's amazing, and that's Sibelius does this in all of his symphonies, but he uses those elements in a completely new and expressively awesome way in this fourth symphony. So now let's talk about the 7 performances I picked. And we can do this fairly quickly because I've been blathering about the piece now for 20 minutes. I think we should talk about recordings. First, my first recommendation, Berglund and the Bournemouth Symphony. Now, Berglund's first Sibelius cycle with the Bournemouth Symphony was special in a lot of ways because Berglund was he was very into textural clarity and precision and articulation, especially of string parts, which you must have in Sibelius. Remember, he was a violinist. And those string parts, those tremolos, they can never sound tired or lazy or smeared. They always have to have vitality. And you get that here. But the Bournemouth Symphony at this stage in its career had a certain rawness and edge to the sound, which Berglund polished away in his later performances. He really did. But in these performances, it's just marvelous. So his fourth, I think, is a great fourth, as are all of these performances. They're really wonderful. Next, in the modern school of Sibelius interpretation. Osmo Venska with the Lotte Symphony Orchestra, not his horrifying remakes in Minnesota, which are nothing but a collection of affectations and mannerisms. Here, he's not affected and mannered, but boy, he is deliberate. The slow movement in this performance is 14 minutes long. Some people stretch it to 12. Usually it's like 10 or 11, maybe. I don't know. But 14, whoa, some really scarifyingly slow tempos, but marvelously sustained. Incredibly gripping with the Lotte Symphony, which is really an enlarged chamber orchestra. It's a full symphony orchestra, but with a smaller string section. It sounds wonderful in these performances. It really does. And he didn't recapture the same spirit or atmosphere at all in his remakes. He did not. And they were also on bis. So if you're going to get Venska, get the Lotte Symphony cycle. And this fourth it raised some eyebrows when it came out because of his choice of these tempi. But he pulls it off. He really pulls it off. It's incredibly, incredibly gripping. Now, my sleeper performance. Kurt Sanderling with the Berlin Symphony Orchestra, the Berliner Symphony Orchestra, East German back in this day, on Berlin Classics. Now, Sanderling was the king of unsmiling pieces. He was a Mahler 6 guy and a Sibelius 4 guy. Anything that was dark and gloomy and nihilistic, kind of like Michael Gielan. Sanderling was totally up for it. And this is the highlight of his Sibelius cycle. He thought this piece was one of the great symphonic masterpieces. And again, his performance is incredibly dark, incredibly gripping. Interestingly, it's about 4 minutes faster than Venska, and he's slow and heavy, which tells you something about how Venska does. But the reason Venska gets away with it is because he doesn't have a huge orchestra to weigh it down. That's the difference. But here we do have a big orchestra, and it's not weighed down because he's a little quicker. And it's a very, very, very smart and serious, incredibly serious, dramatic to the core performance. But Kurt Sanderling is worth hearing in this symphony. Not the whole cycle, but certainly in that symphony. Next, Karajan and the Berlin Phil. Now, some of you may he's controversial. Karajan was always controversial, but he was an echt Sibelian, a very fine Sibelian, and this is a beautiful, beautiful performance of the Fourth Symphony. It is polished, like everything Karajan did, but not to the point of slickness, not to the point where you don't hear the things you're supposed to hear because all you hear is string patina. No, not at all. It gets right to the heart of the piece. The tempos are very moderate and very sensible, and the playing is extraordinary. And for that reason alone, it deserves to be heard. It truly deserves to be heard. This is a DG one. He remade this. He did the symphony, 3 times? I don't know. Maybe there's a mono one and another EMI one. This is the one to get. It's absolutely fantastic. Next, we're almost getting there here. Eugene Ormandy, Hymn of the Chimes, in the finale at the sonore moment. This is a fabulous record, one of the great things that Ormandy did for RCA later on. He recorded the fourth, which we've talked about a little bit. It's in the mono box, the Ormandy mono box, but he did not remake it for Sony or Columbia in stereo. He waited and redid this, coupled on this disc with the seventh, and also the Oceanides, and this is Symphony number 1. Pardon me. It doesn't matter because I know what's on the disc. It's the fourth, the seventh, Oceanides, and also Polkila's Daughter. I think it's a very, very good performance. It's not quite the same couplings as Segerstad, but a great fourth, a great seventh, Ormandy and Philly. Fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. Why did I pull out the wrong one? Oh, well, it's back there in the shelf over here. Trust me, I have it. Then, number 6. Mazel and Vienna. This is great. Mazel is very good in Sibelius, in this cycle anyway. Later on, he slowed everything down absurdly. But in this cycle, he's terrific. And you really want to hear the Vienna Philharmonic just play this piece. Because the Vienna Philharmonic is, in essence, a dark, heavy orchestra. And this is a dark, heavy symphony par excellence. You want to hear the Vienna basses and cellos grind out the opening and those fabulous horns, sounding as if, the heavens are opening. And it's just great. It's absolutely great. The tempi tend to be brisk and very, very effective, and it's a great fourth. It really is. And to hear a great orchestra play this music, many great orchestras have played this music, but this great orchestra play this music is particularly gratifying. However, as I said, the best fourth out there, in my view, is a modern one. It's the Helsinki Philharmonic, the hometown team, which is not always true. I would not always say that. I would not. But they really nail it with Segerstam, who was also a string player, was a violinist, and he gets all of the string writing and Sibelian articulation and tremolos and things so beautifully. You're so conscious also of the motivic work in the symphony, the fact that the opening of the finale is a fast version of the opening of the first movement, that tritonal, do 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 do. Well, the opening of the finale is do 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 do. It's the same thing, just faster and spread out a little bit. But this is a great, 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 one of the great Sibelius records of the past 20 years. 30 years, you really need to have this. If you love Sibelius and you love the fourth, and the Pohjola's daughter and is phenomenal, Oceanides is phenomenal. It's just a great, 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 great record. Period. And so that, my friends, is my disquisition on the Fourth Symphony of Sibelius. Don't be afraid of it. Sink your teeth in and just go for it. It will thrill you. I guarantee it will thrill you. You have to get to know it. You have to give it some time. But it will be so, so worth it. You're going to get to the point where your friends and neighbors and relatives are going to listen. We'll look in on you while you're listening to it, and they're going to say, "What are you, out of your mind?" And then you'll know you've arrived at Sibelian nirvana. So keep on listening, folks. Thanks for joining me. Take care.